Hi, December 27th. Hope you all had a nice holiday. Welcome to NYJ Ground Crew. I am your host and crew chief, A.M. Pfeffer. As always, joining me from Jets Universe, Johnny Jets.
Hello, Jets Universe.
And today we've got a great one for you. We've got a very special guest. The man has been in the game for quite some time. He's going to teach us a lot today, and we're always looking forward to that. Kevin Sirkin from Talk Jets Radio. Kevin, welcome to the broadcast.
Appreciate you guys having me on. Maybe this is the year I finally get to actually talk about a playoff game. So excited to be on with you guys.
Well, that's a big thing, right? As we know, because it's actually a possibility. And before we get there, and we're going to talk about that in a second, we got to hear a little bit about you, right? We want to know about Kevin Sirkin. Where'd you start?
So I got started all in this game. I reached out to Tyson probably like right after I finished up my master's courses, just looking to get involved with the pod, have a voice, covering the team. Tyson had been doing the show for maybe about 6 months to a year at the time. So I started just producing it, like doing like some audio clips and things in the background. And then about 3 years ago, we were in lockdown and we started up the YouTube stuff. We started doing live streams and we were all miserable at the time. We were in our houses. We couldn't do anything. So we just turned it into more of like a bar stool type of thing where we're just drinking, watching the game, just two dudes, kind of having fun and talking sports. So that's kind of where it really started to take off. Yeah.
What else is there, right? I mean, anybody who's out there actually listening to this stuff and cares about the Jets as much as we do, that's who we all are, right? We're all basically just sitting on bar stools, whether virtual or other.
Exactly. Like we've always been so like anti like the clickbait stuff and everything. Like what you see from us, it's genuine, it's authentic, it's real takes, and like we're not going to filter anything for better or for worse. So
yeah, well, that's why we're so glad we're having you on, because you're going to give it the real today. And by the way, if you think there's coffee in this cup, I got another thing coming.
Unfortunately, I'm not drinking today. Usually I'm at work this time of day, so it's nice to actually just be talking some football in the afternoon.
That's true. Midday here on a Tuesday. I think we've all done enough drinking over the Christmas holiday. I hope everybody had a nice one. Let's start with this. Johnny's going to give us the quick rundown of where we are playoff race. The Chargers made it all real easy for us. I mean, he sent me, I think, 11 texts prior to the Chargers game with all of the breakdown of where we'd be in the playoffs. But all of a sudden, here we are Tuesday morning, and it's a lot simpler than that. Johnny, take it away for us, if you don't mind.
Right. Very simply, if the Jets beat the Seahawks and the Dolphins and the Patriots lose one of the next two games, then the Jets will make the playoffs. There is a couple of scenarios in which the Jets can tie either against the Seahawks or tie against the Dolphins if they win the other game, but not tie both games. And with a lot of help, it's extraordinarily unlikely that the Jets would make the playoffs in that scenario. But ties are unusual. They're not unheard of in the National Football League. But 99.999%, the most likely possibility for the Jets making the playoffs is the one everyone's familiar with: win out and have the Patriots lose a game.
Yeah. And, it's a weird, because Mike White coming back all gives us this hope. It's a great big feeling. All of a sudden, there's this possibility of this happening, and we all know what's going on with Miami and what's going on with the Patriots for a second. But the percentages are still very low. Kevin, do you think we make the playoffs? Is this the year that...
I mean, this is as much as I think we could ask for, considering the losing streak and just how, the team has kind of gone downhill from where they were at 6-3, where we were talking about possibly competing for the division, to now, you lose 4 in a row. And it's like, all right, what is this team? Like, what's their identity? And you have a chance in the final 2 games. And that's really all you could ask for. So, yeah, I think the probability should be a little bit higher. I don't see any reason why we can't go into Seattle and win that one. And then all bets are off the final week. If you're playing for a winner go home at Miami, we already took care of them once. Who knows if Tua is even going to play? So I'm excited. I like their chances right now.
Yeah, I mean, Seattle's on the decline, right? And there's got to be this swell of optimism. I mean, Kevin, what do you think? I mean, you're around football players all the time. Like, do you feel like just the notion of Mike White coming back is bumping up everybody in that locker room?
Yes, 1,000%. Because on Thursday night, I mean, I sat through that game until midway through the fourth quarter. I finally left. I had enough. I think it was right after the Garrett Wilson fumble that I left. And I was locked into the sideline almost the entire time, just watching players' body language. There was no energy. There was no enthusiasm. It looked like a lot of guys just didn't even want to deal with Zach Wilson, because they realize he's the problem at this point, and they're tired of constantly trying to pick him up and not getting anything out of him. So I feel like that just kind of rubbed off. Like after that first series, you got the sack fumble, you had the ball back, you only get 3 points, you go 3 and out. And I just felt like there was a lot of energy that was lost after that. So yeah, I think once Drevler came into the game, you saw the huddle. They were a little bit more fired up. You see that with Mike White. All the players have rallied around him. So yeah, I think that's going to be a huge boost for them.
Johnny, you see the offensive line, and everybody's giving them a lot of gruff about, hey, they're not blocking, they're not good enough, they're not this, they're not that. But there's a big difference between Zach in the game and anybody else, right? Anybody else who comes in is all of a sudden it feels like they're jumped up 50% or more in how they're playing. I mean, what do you think? Like, now that Mike White's back, Johnny, you think, you're going to see a much different offensive lineup in Seattle?
Well, the offensive line is not the worst offensive line of all time, but when you are playing in front of the worst quarterback of all time, then you're going to look worse than if you're playing behind someone who's, average or even good. I mean, that's not, this does not absolve the Jets offensive line by Mike White performing better when he's in the game. The offensive line has been weak at best throughout the season, and they're going to continue to be that. Their Swiss cheese offensive line. Does that mean that the Jets can't win football games with this offensive line? It doesn't mean that. It means that it can't win football games with this offensive line and Zach Wilson.
The worst quarterback of all time. I mean, there's a lot of names that come to mind. Johnny, real quick question. Who would you rather have, Zach Wilson, Browning-Nagel? Quick question.
Browning-Nagel.
Okay.
Browning-Nagel. I was in Atlanta at the Georgia Dome, the first real regular season game ever at the Georgia Dome, 1992. The Jets, they were kicked into the playoffs the previous year with Raul Allegre. Of course, they picked Jason Starofsky over him the following year to be the place kicker. He misses 3 field goals in Atlanta, and the Jets lose. Browning-Nagel threw for about 200 of his 366 yards in garbage time. Everyone's like, oh, we have our quarterback. But he was not the quarterback. But he did win football games, and in a way that Zach Wilson never has.
Let's talk about something that's really interesting.
I think the better comparison is Zach Wilson or
Hackenberg.
Yeah,
I knew it.
I am so glad you brought him up, by the way, because we're going to talk about that in a minute. I am so glad you brought him up. But before we do, I want to stick on the playoff train for a second because, hey, we all know what's going on with the Patriots, the Dolphins, all of that. But there are really 2 teams that probably have a much bigger play in, again, assuming the Jets win out, but there's 2 teams that have a bigger play in all of this. And that's Kansas City and Buffalo. And why do I say that? Both teams are 12-3 right now, and Buffalo holds the tiebreaker because obviously they won in Kansas City earlier this year, okay? It makes a big difference. Buffalo might not have to play their starters against New England, right? Assuming, just play out the scenario. The Jets win this weekend, so does New England. They are on a terrible 2-game slide. Belichick often doesn't let that happen. Tua is now hurt. Who knows how Miami's really feeling? They got to go into Foxborough. Assume Patriots win this game. This can come down to the last game of the season. Is Buffalo going to play their starters? If Kansas City loses this weekend, okay, and they are home for the Broncos,
they should lose that game.
And Buffalo wins, they don't necessarily have to play their starters, right? I mean, we got to think about that. Unfortunately, that's the thought process. However, Buffalo's got a tough game Monday night at Cincinnati, and if they don't win, I think the best thing that can happen to us is if they actually don't win that game, because Kansas City is more than likely going to, right? And then Buffalo's going to want to come back and have to go into the playoffs with not only the momentum, but they're going to want that number 1 seed. Everybody's thoughts on that.
We can't be concerned with what might happen week 18 when we play Miami, if whether or not Buffalo has anything to play for. The focus has to be this Sunday at Seattle against the Seahawks, and whether this coach Robert Saleh is going to have his team prepared to play a football game. Now that he has a quarterback medically cleared to play, who is competent and can lead this team to victory. Okay, if this team comes out and plays flat like it did against the Jaguars, then Robert Saleh cannot be the coach of the New York Jets moving forward. If this team comes out to play and plays hard, and then Robert Saleh makes screw-ups in the game for the 3rd game in a row, like he did against Detroit 2 games ago by blowing the clock management in the final minute of the game, like he did last Thursday against the Jaguars by not pulling Zach Wilson at halftime. If he makes critical errors from a coaching perspective against the Seahawks when his Jets team is in a position to win, then that's an indictment on Robert Saleh, and it's time to call up Sean Payton and offer him a Brinks truck.
Kevin, how are you feeling about Saleh? I mean, first of all, do you think he's going to make the right calls? Is he going to coach better than he has in the past couple of games? And do you agree with what Johnny's saying?
I feel better about Saleh at this time of this year than I did this time of last year, if that makes sense. I feel like as far as holding players accountable, he's done a pretty good job this year. I think the defense has taken a very nice leap, although I think they've kind of gone backwards a little bit the last couple weeks, where teams are just okay taking the first downs and methodically moving down the field. They're not giving up those huge plays. It's kind of bend but don't break, but teams are kind of running up time of possession and they can't really get off the field. They're not forcing a lot of turnovers. It just seems like they lack that killer instinct, and they're not really getting pressure either. So, yeah, I definitely want to see a lot more from Saleh. but I'm more encouraged than I was again at this time of last year. I think he has shown enough to get at least another year.
Yeah, and we're going to circle back to him in a second, but
the defense is also the defense is also bending, not breaking at inopportune times of the game.
Yep.
You know, against the game at Buffalo, Mike White leads the team down the field to score a touchdown, and then immediately the Jets defense lets Buffalo drive all the way down and score a touchdown. Obviously, the C.J. Mosley penalty. I'll pause for everyone to laugh and scream in agony when Dawson Knox ended up over center. That helped in that drive. But nonetheless, the defense, that's on the defense on that game. And against the Jaguars, okay, you want to say, look, Zach Wilson's the quarterback. They got the turnover with Quinnen Williams right away, and then Zach Wilson actually went backyards and led to the Greg Zuerlein field goal, could not put the ball in the end zone, and then the defense took the rest of the night off. Fine, you want to absolve them on that level. I think that's perfectly reasonable. But this defense is at a pattern of behavior the entire season where at critical times in games that they have given up big drives. That has to stop now. Okay, they have to be this A-plus top 5 defense that they've been heralded as all year, sending 3 Pro Bowlers to the Pro Bowl and whatever, non-Hawaii city it is this year. They've got to come out and they've got to kick the teeth out of Geno Smith, figuratively, of course, ladies and gentlemen, and win this game.
Yeah, I really like Romeo's comment here, though. He's right. The defense has not gotten the turnovers of the past 3 or 4 games that we had earlier in the season, and that's a big, big difference right now. And I'm going to come to the defense of the defense on this, okay? I still think the defense is playing. But I still think they're playing very well, and they're on brand to give up 18 points or less per game. That means the offense has to go out there and produce, fair. And that's the thing that hasn't been happening. We were 1-6 in the red zone in Minnesota. The Buffalo game was an absolute slugfest the first half of that game, defense on defense. So and in a terrible rainstorm. So notwithstanding, but you had Zach come out in the last 2 games and he couldn't move the ball. That was a problem.
And a lot of these losses, you could say that the defense did more than enough. If the offense would have put up 20 points, you win the game. I mean, at New England, they only gave up 3 points. It's the special teams touchdown that screwed them over. At Minnesota, 2nd and goal at the 1, you punch that in. You win that game. At Buffalo, the Carter fumble, the Berrios drop, like all these plays, they add up. So I agree with Johnny that, at inopportune times in the fourth quarter, they've given up some long drives, some costly points, but I think they've still done enough where if you have a competent offense and a competent quarterback playing, you're probably winning these games. So
but it's like an ace pitcher whose team doesn't hit for him when he pitches, whether it's Jacob deGrom or Johan Santana. There's so many examples. Those Hall of Fame pitchers go out and they know that they can only give up 0 or 1 runs to win the game. And when the defense knows that Zach Wilson is playing quarterback, they know they basically have to shut out the other team, and giving up 19 points a game is not acceptable. However, I do agree wholeheartedly 100%. If the Jets limit the Seahawks to 19 points, if the Jets limit the Dolphins to 19 points, then the Jets should be in the playoffs, provided the Patriots lose one of their last 2 games.
Yeah. Well, moving on from that for a second, I want to say this because assuming we move on from Wilson, which is obviously now the talk and more than likely it's going to happen, I want to say this personally. I'm still more disappointed with the Hackenberg pick, and I'm glad we brought up his name earlier. But I will say this: I think a lot of people are going to look at this and be like, "We never should have picked Wilson" and all of that. Personally, I'm just saying that I'm still more disappointed that we took Hackenberg with the 51st pick in the draft. Deion Jones, who had a good 4 or 5 years, to the start of his career, especially we needed a linebacker before we took Jenkins in that draft. But the Hackenberg pick, more than anything, he was the reason the following year, when we had McNown and he still had Petty on the roster, that we didn't go after Mahomes or Watson at the time, right? And Watson was still a viable play. And again, notwithstanding what happened in his own personal life, and I'm certainly not defending the guy, but that was a big difference, a huge thing that happened. You talk about, hey, losing out on Trevor Lawrence was one thing, but the Wilson thing, to me was the right swing because we had the number 2 pick. He was the guy. I'm not saying he was necessarily the guy. I, at the time, still wanted us to trade down, but I understood why we went out there and why we fell in love with him. And I never understood why we traded 3 second-round picks to move up to number 3 spot to get Darnold, when, by the way, we didn't even know we were getting Darnold.
And that's why I'll disagree with you, because I feel like the number 3 overall pick, you had a chance, or you could have just stayed at number 6 overall and taken Josh Allen. You trade up, you take Sam Darnold. To me, that's a bigger miss. But the number 2 overall, you had multiple options for how they could have handled this. They could have traded down, gotten 2 extra first-round picks like the Dolphins did. There were so many different directions they could have gone in. And I feel like in a COVID year, they got swindled into taking Zach Wilson. You know, he was a 5th-round grade coming into that season. He played against nobodies. I was a big proponent of taking Justin Fields at the time because he was always the guy. It was always Trevor Lawrence and Justin Fields, 1 and 2. And then somewhere like mid-November, early December, all of a sudden, you know, you start hearing more and more about Zach Wilson. This kid comes out of nowhere, makes some great throws in shorts at his pro day, and all of a sudden he's the guy. And I'm like, well, what has he done against proven talent, against good defenses? So to me, like, that was more of like a project pick. And then to hand him the job his rookie year when he clearly wasn't ready, you know, like you could actually look at the Jets and say, all right, you know, that's the one area where they didn't handle his development right. For all the talent that they gave him, giving him a good offensive coordinator, the one thing I think they screwed up was starting him right away and just throwing him right into the fire when he wasn't ready.
Well, to that end, and I'm so glad you brought that up, and Johnny and I have talked about this, you know, since day one on this. I don't think any of these guys, and I don't care who you are, Trevor Lawrence or Andrew Luck or whoever, should not see the field year one. And possibly you should see the field year 2 anyway. So that's already the biggest issue. But I'm so glad you brought this up, because this is really the problem with why we had to take the swing. This is where the NFL is these days, right? This whole thing, and it started back in 2011, the rookie contract, right? This notion of go out, get your superstar, hope you land on the guy, put them together for 2 years, and then you have another 2 years where you're bringing in the big name free agents, and you still ride in that rookie contract till all of a sudden, right after the fact, you're paying $50 million a year for these guys. Kyler Murray is the perfect example of this, right? 2 years, he was there. He had the Pro Bowl pedigree. His first year, he was good. His second year, he was excellent. And then all of a sudden, the third year, he looked great, blah, blah, blah. But, you know, and then he forced the hand in year 4 before year 5 and the contract over to the extension and all of that. But even still, this is the mindset of where we are. And you're seeing the product on the field, which isn't great across the board, right? Either you have this robust, and now you've got 37 guys in free agency coming next year, and there's a lot to uncover here. But I mean, Johnny, do you think we made the right pick with Wilson? I mean, obviously we know, looking back, that's not the answer I'm looking for, but I'm saying, like, would you have gone back, you know, and not knowing what you know now, still made the pick on Wilson, or is somebody even more upsetting than him, or do you feel just absolutely awful about this across the board with him?
Well, in terms of a snapshot of draft day, I mean, I wanted Penei Sewell out of Oregon, and that has been borne out. He's an all-pro football player. You know, I think it's not so much that, you know, what Zach Wilson was the day he was drafted. It's what Zach Wilson has revealed himself to be at this point publicly, but certainly for quite a long time at One Jets Drive in Florham Park, as we know from Garrett Wilson's comments after the second Patriots game. The New York Jets have known for a very long time that Zach Wilson's zero IQ is close to 0.0. Okay, he's not capable of playing as a starting quarterback in the National Football League, not based on his throwing arm or arm talent or wherever it's called or going to be called. It's because he does not have the wherewithal. He doesn't have the brain. He doesn't have the mindset. He doesn't have those type of intangibles to lead a football team as a quarterback. Okay, once they knew that, they knew it, and they ignored it. Because he was a second-round pick, because they're on the hook for all this money, because he's the face of the franchise, and so forth and so on. Yes, the Jets could have traded another player. They could have taken another player with the number 2 pick. They could have traded out of the number 2 pick and probably got 2 first-round picks for it. You know, if you want to go back to Blair Thomas, who was the second pick overall in 1990. 1 pick after him was Cortez Kennedy by the Seahawks. 3 picks after him was Junior Seau of the San Diego Chargers. If you want to go back to 1980, when the Jets traded up to get Johnny Lamb Jones at the number 2 pick, they had I'm sorry, I'm mixing decades. It's so much awful Jets history. In 1990, when the Jets took Blair Thomas at number 2, they could have traded out and gotten, I think, the 8th pick and the 13th pick, which ultimately went to I think the Patriots. Okay, they could have taken Richmond Webb at number 8 and Emmitt Smith at number 13. Okay, but they held on to Blair Thomas. So you want to go through all of these things through Jets history. I can't agree that Christian Hackenberg is a worse pick than Zach Wilson. A, because Christian Hackenberg was a second-round pick, and A, because Christian Hackenberg never got on the football field. Okay, Vernon Gholston.
I want to clarify something here.
Had more plays.
I want to clarify something here. I'm saying I didn't say it was a worse pick. What I'm saying is I'm more upset by the Hackenberg pick. That's how
I don't see how I disagree. I'm not going to say I don't see.
I mean, and I'm glad you do, but I'm saying from an organizational standpoint,
Zach Wilson is
everybody knew Hackenberg. Besides, you know, our GM, everybody knew Hackenberg shouldn't have even been near the second round. Okay, Wilson was on a lot of draft boards, unfortunately, for a lot of people back in the first.
What damage did Christian Hackenberg do to the Jets team? It wasn't a great team. It wasn't a playoff team.
So this
team is a playoff team, and the reason if they don't make the playoffs, the reason they're not already clinched the playoffs is Zach Wilson. He's a destructive force to this organization. It's a way more horrible pick than Christian Hackenberg.
And again, that's fine. But my point is, what we lost out with Hackenberg, you had to take the second pick. You took your swing on the kid. It didn't
No, you
work.
didn't have to do
now
it.
we know
You did
we
not
have
have to take Zach Wilson. You did not have to take
let's
a
talk
quarterback.
about how we move on from him. Kevin, how do we move on from him? What's it really going to take to get him off the team, and where do we go from there?
It's going to take Mike White lighting it up these final two games. And even then, you wonder, I mean, he's a free agent. What kind of contract does he get? Do the Jets value him the same way? Hopefully it doesn't become like Fitzpatrick in 2015, where he was asking for 16 million. Jets were only offering, I think, 8 million. Eventually they settled, I think, at 12. Hopefully it's not that kind of scenario playing out, because obviously Mike White, this is going to be his one time to get that big time contract. So he's going to take it, whoever offers it. So, but yeah, if he lights it up these final two games, I think he's coming back. If he struggles, I think you're probably in the market for, one of the big time quarterbacks. You're probably trying to make a run at Lamar Jackson or trading for an Aaron Rodgers if he becomes available. But if Mike White does okay, if he's kind of in the middle, you bring him back, you sign a mid-level veteran, and they all compete with Zach, and those are your three.
What do you think Mike White's worth, Johnny? What do we pay him, and what's the contract look like? Because I know you're a big fan of his.
I would overpay for Mike White. It's not going to be that expensive because he's Mike White and he hasn't gotten a big contract before in the way that Ryan Fitzpatrick got from the Buffalo Bills previous in his career. So I think it's a difference in that way. I think you come to a reasonable agreement with Mike White, and you give him you don't give him a hometown discount. You overpay him to keep him because you need him on this football team, or your locker room is going to kill you. And just to clarify what I was saying before, it was Anthony Munoz at number 3 to the Bengals that went one pick after Johnny Lamb Jones in 1980 when the Jets took Johnny Lamb Jones. My apologies.
Glad that's been clarified. So Mike White,
if he makes the playoffs, they have no choice but to pay him. They'd have no choice.
Yeah. And even if he doesn't, even if he wins out the next 2 games, right? And he looks as good because he really, for the 3 games that he was in, really played above B+ ball. I mean, he came in 5 years in. He looks like a veteran. He looks like somebody who can run an NFL offense. Okay. And he knows the NFL offense. And to your point, Johnny, the team does love him, right? And the players are, backing this guy. We know his biggest downfall at this point, besides the fact that he can't run, but he can a little bit if you watch the tape. It's much more about the fact that he's willing to stand there and take the hit. That's the issue, is that he's going to get hurt again. And then you're dealing with how much time is he out with cracked ribs, bum knee, bad shoulder, whatever it may be, because you have to rely on a backup, and you're going to have somebody better than 37-year-old Flacco back there, and certainly not Zach Wilson. But, that's the issue with him. But yeah, what do we pay this guy? Is it 12 million? Is it 15? Is it 20? Is it 20 million a year for 3 years? I mean, the cap rises next year from 208 all the way up to 220 now. A very different look than what you were thinking about in 2015-16. The money has really come back post-COVID here, and you can pay a guy like him 20 million, which is a lot better than having to be saddled with, 50 million for Kyler, 50 million for Deshaun, 50 million for Russell. I mean, those teams could be in a lot of trouble sitting on who they've got. But do we go out there and give Lamar 50 million? Is it worth it to do that and try and get him for 5 years? I'd still say yes.
Well, I mean, that's a different question than what do you pay Mike White? I mean, you pay Lamar Jackson more than you pay Mike White, but you pay Mike White enough to keep him here. And the question is, will there be other suitors for Mike White? Will other teams be interested in signing him as a free agent? And if there are other teams, how much are they going to be? What are they going to offer? And that is also going to be affected by the fact that he can't stay on the field. So I think that necessarily limits the amount that Mike White is going to be offered to play even for another team.
Kevin, you think there are teams out there who want to pay him?
I think these final 2 games could swing whatever he gets offered, anywhere from like 6 to 8 million upwards. If he actually has a playoff run, wins a playoff game or 2, to somewhere around 14, 15 million per year. Yeah. As far as being offered a starting job somewhere else, again, that depends on actually going to the playoffs, winning a playoff game. If he just plays okay these final 2 games, Jets don't make the playoffs, I don't think he's going to get any crazy offers, because I think any team with a quarterback void, they're probably either a team that's in the top 5 or top 10 of the draft, and they're going to look to take their kid in the draft, or they're just going to try to, sign or trade for, like you said, Lamar Jackson or Aaron Rodgers or somebody like that.
Right. Goes right back to that same problem. Looking to take their kid in the draft, right? I mean, most of the time you got about a 20 to 25% hit ratio of these guys coming out, and within 2 years developing into the quarterback that you ultimately need. So you're again back to that rookie contract before you're suddenly paying 40, 50, and what could be $60 million a year for some of these guys moving forward.
I'm done drafting quarterbacks.
Yeah, I mean, at least in the first round. I mean, why do it? Why have to pay some guy in the top 10 or top 12? And hope that he pans out. I mean, this has been back to back, especially for the Jets. We should all have that bitter taste in our mouth with Darnold, who now, by the way, could be leading his team to a playoff berth.
Geno Smith and Darnold both in the playoffs. Imagine.
Yeah. he'd be just fine. I mean, if he was the guy who was playing now, he'd probably be just fine. If what we're looking for from these guys with the defense that we have and the special teams that we have and the way we're trying to run the ball, oddly enough, of course, he would be good. But let's talk about like actually what it takes to move off from Zach Wilson, right? Let's go inside the numbers a little bit. Next year, I mean, this is really what it comes down to. He is owed guaranteed money for the next 2 years. And it's not a tremendous amount, but this is where it's at. Next year is $3.855 million. Again, $3.855 in 2023. And again, and this is the big one, he's still owed guaranteed money in 2024. That is $5.453 million. Okay? So a little over $9 million across the board in guaranteed money. Not a tremendous amount of money, of course, as we know, but you're still asking somebody to take that on if you're trying to trade him. Or you pull what Cleveland did in Baker Mayfield and you eat some of that salary. And that's more than likely what's going to happen, right? We're going to try and get back the 6th-rounder that we gave away for Robinson. Kevin, you got something to say?
Well, what does Joe Douglas value more, clearing the contract or the compensation that he can get back from trading Zach? I think that's the question there.
Well, I mean, you're saying just to clear the contract, like, hey, get, either pre-June 1st, post-June 1st, and then just kind of eat the dead money.
Well, yeah.
You're getting dead money either way.
Well, yeah, but if they're totally like convinced, all right, this kid isn't the guy, he needs to change of scenery, we need to move on from him. Is it more important to just get rid of his salary, or are they actually looking to wait, play the game that they played with Mims and Elijah Moore and actually get, the kind of value that they want back? That's what I'm wondering about with Douglas.
Well, what's he worth at this point, Johnny? I'd love to hear what you think Zach Wilson's worth.
Right now, he's probably worth nothing.
Blue plate special here.
I don't think they can get anything for him in any kind of trade. But it seems to me that the question is, you're saying over a 2-year period, it's roughly a $9 million cap hit that the Jets would take if they cut Zach Wilson. They just get rid of him. So that would be addition by subtraction. He wouldn't be there anymore. There wouldn't be a question as to whether he's going to infect this team with his rotten attitude, his rotten quarterback play, et cetera. And it would clear the lane for either Mike White and any other quarterbacks that are on the team next year to lead the Jets at that position. The question is, if the Jets don't make the playoffs this year, the answer to the question, why didn't they make the playoffs? The answer is Zach Wilson. Is it worth $9 million for the Jets to have made the playoffs this year? It seems to me the answer is yes. If you could have gone to the beginning of season and said to Joe Douglas, we're going to take away $9 million of your cap money, but we'll guarantee you to make the playoffs. He would have signed up for that in a heartbeat. Anybody would. Okay, that's the destructive nature of Zach Wilson. He's going to continue to be that. He's not getting any better. And if you're telling me that that's all it takes, if it's going to really basically, what is that? One contract, 1 or 2, 1, 3 contracts. How many players will the Jets not be able to sign because they cut Zach Wilson? But they'll be so much better because he's not there. Then that's absolutely worth it.
Unfortunately, it's a lot of players. I mean, again, the cap jumps that extra $12 million that you need, and that's a huge help for us to do that. But when you're talking about the end, like right at the end there, when you're trying to get those extra couple of linebackers. I mean, look at Quan Alexander's contract this year, only a little over $1 million. But if you're trying to bring him back, or anybody else that you need to fill out the rotation or pay your new rookies coming in, whatever it may be, that $9 million can make a big difference, especially when you kind of need that that funny money right at the end.
Whatever veteran O lineman they got to sign once Becton goes down.
But that money wasn't that money was not available for this year because it was being paid to Zach Wilson. Right. Yeah. So if you had the same team, but instead of 53 roster, you had a 52 roster without Zach Wilson, this team makes the playoffs.
he's that detrimental. I'm not so sure about that. But again, you're by the way, let's say you trade him and you get rid of that guaranteed $9 million and you take back, 50, 60% of it, whatever it is over the 2 years, and you still got 11.5 in dead cap money as part of that contract, which you could spread over 2 years. And again, or you just get rid of him. I mean, I think his dead cap is over $20 million next year. Pre June 1, then it gets a little intricate. We can talk about that next time, but it is interesting. And I agree. I mean, I think we're all coming to the conclusion, like, no matter what it costs, you got to get him off the team. He's bad for the locker room. He's bad for morale. You don't want him around. Now, will some other team out there want him? That's the big question. I would say yes. And Johnny, I mentioned this last week, and I know you kind of threw it back in my face a little bit, and I don't blame you for doing it. But to me, the fact that he's got 21 starting games under his belt, other teams love that. That's a big thing when you're paying a guy $3 to $7 million to sit on the bench and to come off. He does have the ability to, to play, and he's got 20 plus starts. That's a big thing for coaches. They want to know that some guy isn't just throwing back into the fire who's never seen the field before. Kevin?
I'll just say real quick, like, I wouldn't have an issue with him coming back for his third year. I agree that right now he's an issue in the locker room, but I think that's more because he's been thrust into that starting role before he's ready. And the rest of the team essentially developed a lot quicker than he has, where now he's looked at as the problem. But he's still a 22-year-old kid with all the physical tools. The problem is that's the exact same conversation that we were having, the moment he was drafted. Kid with a great arm, mobility, like all these physical things, but nothing else has clicked yet. He hasn't developed as a quarterback mechanically, accurately, like nothing has improved yet. So I wouldn't have an issue giving him that third year just because he's so young and the raw talent is there. But again, that also, I think, depends on what quarterbacks they're looking at, how much they might have to pay Mike White, if any of those other veteran options are realistic possibilities. So yeah, if you ultimately need that money from Zach Wilson because you're totally convinced he's finished, that's fine. But if it's Mike White coming back, I wouldn't mind Zach as, the second or third option, if just in case he gets hurt again, which he has, the last 2 years.
Johnny, before you answer, I want to say something right there. You wouldn't mind him as the second option. You're saying
probably not the second option.
You're active on Sundays.
Probably not the second option. You're right. Probably not the second option.
But if you're doing that, now you're carrying 3 guys. You've got to stuff them on the practice squad, or you have to keep them on the roster on the 53. But not. Let's assume you don't want to pay him that money, or keep him in, and you're giving up that spot to go on the Sundays. You're putting him on the practice squad, and if you're not protecting him, then anybody else can just poach him, and you're not really. And then what? What's that costing you?
That's also the problem financially, because if you're paying him $10 million, you pay Mike White, let's say, 10 or 12 million, what's that second option going to cost you? Another veteran, probably somewhere in the 5 to 10 million range. Well, now you're paying, 35 million for all 3 of your quarterbacks, and you don't have that, Pat Mahomes guy back there. So that's a lot of money to put in your quarterbacks. I completely agree. But ultimately, again, like, are they going to get any value back, or are they just completely done with the experiment? I know Saleh keeps saying we're not going to quit on the kid. But, I tend to think if they can get something of value back, they definitely trade him. But if it's only, like a 4th or a 5th round pick, I don't know if Douglas is just going to ship him off that easily.
4th or 5th. Hey, I honestly, I'd take a 6th or even a conditional 7th at this point. I really would. I think getting him off the team is that important.
I think I would. I don't know if Joe Douglas would.
He might not. He likes to, he does like to wait things out. And look, these teams get needy, but the big difference this time coming around, 37 free agent quarterbacks next year. 37, notwithstanding the big draft that's coming out, right? The big swings everybody wants to take on at least 5 guys who are probably going to go in the first rounds. So, just get Zach Wilson wherever he can go, get him off the team, move on from it, and have somebody who's your real backup. Let's go because backups, again, they cost between $3 to $7 million. Actually, the number one guy, who the biggest and the most paid backup this year is? It's actually Darnold. Now he's taken over the starting position, but he makes $7.5 million a year. But before that, he was the backup at $7.5 million. Most guys, again, all the way down to Nick Foles at about 3. Joe Flacco's a little over 3. Most guys are between that 3 and 7 number. Let's say we got someone for 5 or 6, whoever it may be, in second, and keep Mike White for whatever he costs. If he's worth it, yeah, then we've got something. But you got to move on from Zach. It's poison at this point, because you see what the musical chairs did to us, throughout these last 4 games. That's been a problem. Would have been better.
I think the bigger thing is that Zach's probably going to want out too. Like, his agent's probably going to, request a trade at some point in the offseason, just because it's not good, I think, for his psyche to walk into his home stadium and he's got the crowd chanting, "We want Strebler," and "Wilson sucks," and everything else. I think he's just going to want a change of scenery at this time.
I want to talk about
the reason that I said that I wasn't impressed by the fact that Zach Wilson has 20 plus starts as a quarterback in the National Football League was in the context of keeping him as the Jets starter. I don't discount the fact that that's going to look good and will be valued by other teams who are possibly interested in trading for him. And I completely agree with you, Aaron, that if Joe Douglas can trade Zach Wilson for anything just to get him off the books, then that's better in the context of trading Zach Wilson than any draft pick they're going to get back for them. And I will say that what I heard from people who are not Jets fans from other parts of the country who were seeing this 2022 Jets team for the first time when they played the Jaguars, because it was the first time they were on national television, they were like, I had no idea how bad Zach Wilson is, because they hadn't seen him play other than that game. So what we need is an owner and or general manager of one of the other 31 teams who did not see the Jets play the Jaguars on Thursday night to trade for Zach Wilson.
Kevin, I want to ask you a question about Saleh, as I like to call him Bobby, as Johnny knows him on a first name basis with him. Never met the man, never even been within 100 yards of him. But hey, Bobby, I like personally, and I've been defending him. I certainly want him back. I think he's absolutely the guy. And for a number of reasons, but I personally like the way he handles press conferences, and a lot of people don't. He's polarizing, but I want to hear your thoughts. Again, you're around, personnel, you're around players. You've seen this firsthand. What do you think of how he's handled these press conferences. I mean, to me, it's interesting. I mean, obviously the mantra for him, all gas, no brakes, but it's really just, more fitting for him is like all company line, no veering. That's
Yeah.
solid. Like, and I think it's working and it's the right message. And I quickly want to add why. To me, he is the player's coach. That's who he's known for. So the things that he says is always it's like how Goodell, as the commissioner, protect the shield. I mean, you might not like the guy and he's making 40 plus a year and all of the kind of things, but he always has that through line, like protect the shield. Well, Saleh is a player's coach, and the way he talks is protect the players. Even Wilson, even the idea of, hey, we're not giving up on this young man, even though we all know that he is. And a lot of people they're giving Saleh gruff because he's not necessarily so truthful in what he's saying. But to me, he's saying the right things and handling the right way. He quells the drama that way. Kevin, what do you think?
And that goes back to the receipt comments where at the time I was like, dude, what are you doing? This isn't the time. I think they were 1-2 at the time. I'm like, this isn't the time for you to be putting a spotlight on the team and, calling out receipts. But ultimately, I feel like that was him kind of putting the spotlight on himself, and the players responded to it. And you could see, like you said, he's a player's coach, and these guys, they play hard for him. So I think he's got a lot of respect in the locker room. I think he's handled the press conferences well, with one exception. I think after some of these losses, I mean, maybe it's just, the old school fan in me. I'd like to see him get a little bit more pissed off at some of these, some of these things that happen, some of these mistakes that have happened. It's not just one game now. It's been 4 in a row, especially after the Jacksonville game. I thought he'd be a little bit more pissed off, but that's just who he is. He's more steady, trust the process. That's the kind of guy he is. And, I think that's gone a long way in the locker room. And for me, at least, it's given him another year to at least try to figure out some of these things. I think there's been a lot of areas that have been improved, but, time of possession, we can point to the Lion game and some of the mistakes he made there. So he's got a lot to work on, but certainly we've seen enough progress where, I'm excited to see a third year from him at least.
Johnny, hold on. We're going to give you the last word on this, I promise. But I do want to interject one thing here because I know where you're going to go with this a little bit, and I'm glad and I'm excited to hear it. And Kevin, I'm glad you brought up what you did, because besides the press conferences, I still think Saleh, for the most part, again, these last couple of games, a couple of not so great stuff, but it wasn't as bad as I've seen some of these other coaches doing. But for the most part, earlier in the year, game clock management, situational football was good. It was above average, was actually very good in a lot of ways. And that's important because we know how much of this game is about situational football. And after watching Gase and specifically watching Bowles, and especially watching Bowles this year doing Tampa Bay, a terrible, just horrendous, in-game management, situational football stuff. Even Rex, those last 3 years, not good in any way, shape, or form. Saleh this year has not only been competent, but he and the staff have looked very good at times up until these last few games. And like I said, these last couple of games, they weren't the worst mistakes you've ever seen at the wrong times. But Johnny, let's hear your thoughts on this, please.
Yeah, I mean, you could also compare Robert Saleh in his second year to Bill Parcells in his second year, or Vince Lombardi in his second year. If you want to compare and contrast, if you compare him to Todd Bowles and Adam Gase, Robert Saleh is not as horrible as those coaches. I'm glad you took the time to point that out. It's duly noted. But with respect to what Kevin was saying about Robert Saleh and his press conferences, Woody Johnson is an owner that listens to the fans. Ultimately, he got rid of Mangini on that basis. He's gotten rid of other coaches on that basis. With Todd Bowles, he didn't. Yes, that's an exception. And if Robert Saleh is going to continue to spew this line of garbage that he does at press conferences without taking the temperature of the Jets fan base, which clearly knows at least as much about his football team as he does, about who's playing well and who's not playing well, and certainly about Robert Saleh's coaching performance, if not ability, then the fans are going to turn on Robert Saleh next year in a way that is going to be with extreme vitriol, and the owner is going to take that into consideration in terms of whether or not letting go Robert Saleh at the end of next year. Okay. In terms of Robert Saleh's performance as a coach, whether he's been good at times or less than good at times, and yes, he has not been great the last couple of games, and earlier in the season he was better than he was in the last couple of games. These 2 games ahead of him, at least the Seattle game, okay, and almost certainly the Dolphins game, are quasi playoff games. So it's all on the line for him, and it won't matter what he did in the first 15 games if he coaches like crap the next 2 games. Okay. I don't want to hear about it. I don't want to hear about any kind of attributes or good things they did in the past. It's all on the line. That's why he's here. And if he can't cut it, he's got to go.
Kevin, what do you think is going to happen in the next 2 games? Let's hear it, and then we'll end the cast on that. But what are your thoughts on Saleh, staff, White? What are your expectations?
If I'm being completely honest, just going back again to 2009, the way that things swung after the Jets lost that Falcon game and then all the momentum that they had going into the Colt game, it feels so similar. And early in the year, it felt like there was a lot of magic around this team. It felt like there were a lot of good vibes. The locker room had a lot of chemistry. Then it started to go downhill a little bit. And then once Mike White came in there, I think you started to see what this team could be. Especially offensively, just moving the football. They just got to convert in the red zone. So I like their chances going into Seattle. I really do. I think they're going to have a lot of energy this game. I think they match up pretty well with Seattle. And ultimately, if you get to Miami with the chance to win or go home, if it's that kind of game, and I do think Miami's going to beat New England. I don't think we're going to need Buffalo at all. I think Miami's going to take care of New England, and it's going to be between us and them for that final spot. And I think you're looking at upwards of like 30 or 40,000 Jet fans that are going to be out there in Miami, because we've been waiting 12 years to go to a friggin' playoff game, and they're going to be fired up. They're going to fly out there. We're going to take over that stadium. And if it comes down to that final game, we're not giving it to the fish. We're going to be in the playoffs.
And Teddy Bridgewater is not chopped liver, and probably Robert Saleh's best move as a coach is putting a bounty on Teddy Bridgewater and having Sauce Gardner take his head off on that first play of offense for the Dolphins against the Jets early in the season. So Robert Saleh's got to give credit for that, for being a modern day Buddy Ryan.
For Johnny Jets, I am AM Pfeffer. This is NYJ Ground Crew. Kevin Sirkin of Jets Talk Radio, we cannot thank you enough for joining us. This has been incredible, amazing. This was a lot of fun, man. We got to have you back. Let's go Jets, right? As I like to say, the new mantra, War Jets. You got to kick their butt on Sunday. And I am the biggest Bridgewater fan out there. I might even wear his jersey. You all are too. Thank you, everybody.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks, guys.
Goodbye, Jets Universe.